Well, hello there everyone! A few weeks ago, I put it to a vote what game I'd do as a boss ranking for games that were from my childhood, and to my surprise, MechAssault 2 ended up winning. I'm not complaining, however, as this game also played a key part in my childhood, as I played the heck out of this game, but I found it brutally difficult. That being said, unlike MechAssault 1, I actually did beat this game when I was young, though instead of being around 4 when I first played it, I was around 8 years old, and I got stuck on quite a few levels, most notably the boss fights. But I was able to eventually overcome. Speaking of the boss fights, while I did have to stretch the definition of what is and isn't a boss from MechAssault 1, we thankfully don't have that issue here in 2, as most of the bosses are either mechs that only appear once, guard a data core, take place during a climactic battle in the story, or possibly are completely original foes. Sadly, while there are more bosses, they're not all for the better, as the bad fights in this game are considerably worse than anything from MechAssault 1. But the same could be said for the good fights, as they reach heights that the first game couldn't even dream of. I also love this game's soundtrack, but it's heavily copywritten, so sadly no dice on music segments. But hey, I have a video showing off all the game's boss fights for those of you who want to see it, so consider giving that a look. On that note, let's get on with the video. Number 10, the Mad Cat. Unfortunately, despite how iconic the Mad Cat is, his boss fight, I say in massive air quotes, is less than fun. You sneak inside the Word of Blake compound, but you're on foot, meaning a single stray bullet could kill you. Normally, these on foot segments are fine as they're more puzzle focused, and I know this sounds crazy in a mech combat game, but I actually generally like the puzzles. But here, there's no real puzzle. Here, it's just a stealth mission, and it kinda sucks. You have to take out the generator towers in the compound while sneaking around enemy tanks and avoiding that Mad Cat. The tank's main issue is that when they're around a corner, it can be a crapshoot as to whether they're looking your way or not unless you've learned their timings. As for the Mad Cat himself, it's a total crapshoot. He could be blind as a bat and you could walk right in front of him, or he could hunt your ass across the map and fire off his PPCs your way, which have been upgraded in MechAssault 2 to shoot out from all sides as well. They basically act like a Doom 2016 BFG. Don't try to be stealthy here, just kill the one tank in your way with the bombs, and then book it to that unpiloted Mad Cat of your own to kill the patrolling Mad Cat, who has maxed out weapons because screw you. Of course he does. After he's dealt with, the stealth part is over, but so is the combat. It's simply a matter of destroy the remaining generators, then get the hell out before the entire compound blows up in a massive explosion. Number 9, the Spider Swarm. The Coliseum segment of MechAssault 2 is a part I want to like, as it's some of the most interaction we get with the game's main antagonist, and it technically has multiple phases. With the first part, you're fighting off some ravens, which are pretty weak scout mechs. Overall, it's fine, nothing too special, but the fight starts to fall apart once the real boss shows up. The mini spiders that are a tiny reskin of another major boss, now only having their crossbow missile attack and their leaping attack, which, when they latch onto you, not only do they do damage to your mech over time, but they also start trying to hack your mech, which will kill you when it finishes. So the fight is periodically stopped by these little asshats making you play a Mario Party minigame without your consent. For the record, I like the hacking minigame, but not when it's coming up every 5 seconds and you're getting dogpiled constantly. Thankfully, due to the blood-ass buff machine guns and the abundance of health drops, you're in very little danger of truly dying here if you're good at the hacking minigame, but it's still a fairly miserable time. Thankfully though, when you get to the end of the fight, Alara will show up in the final phase to provide support with the remaining spiders. Given some story beats, this part acts as an uneasy alliance, but she is ultimately trying to help you, so I'll give it some credit there as a solid story beat. It's just a shame that Hesper's 2 ends on an irritating note, because otherwise it has some of my favorite levels in the entire game. Number 8, the Star Adder. So this boss desperately wants to be Ragnarok 2.0, but I gotta be honest, the Star Adder just doesn't do it for me. The Blood Asp is just an objectively better and stronger version of this mech with a better moveset, and honestly the red paint looks a bit cooler. And blue is my favorite color, so how do you screw that up? It is neat though how the surviving Highlanders will assist you in this boss fight, but they'll all be one-shot anyways, and there isn't much cover here either. But it doesn't really matter because despite how deadly plasma PPCs can be, you could easily beat this boss by just sidestepping and staying close to him with the machine guns, so the plasma bolts won't be able to really track you because you're too close. And not only does the Star Adder have less health than most assault mechs, but also no defensive abilities whatsoever, meaning your Mad Cat will make quick work of this ultimate mech that's playable for only a small part of one level, and it's the worst level in the entire freaking game. Which I guess it also caps off Northwind, which is the worst planet in the game, so it's kind of fitting. Meanwhile, the Blood Asp is playable for some of the game's best levels, and the Spider Coliseum, but hey, take the good with the bad. Number 7, the Hellbringers. And right before we fight the Star Adder, we have a battle against Tweedledum and Tweedledipshit. The most notable part of this fight is that the Northwind Highlanders are making a suicide charge in their elementals to take on the enemies. The idea of fighting alongside the Space Scots is kinda cool, and that's what bumps it up a few points, as the battle is super easy, but good luck keeping any of these little guys alive, and the Hellbringers do at least have their own unique attack of a Flare Cannon, which is basically just a ball of fire thrown at the enemy. Not anything crazy, but ultimately, I'd say we've gotten out of the bad bosses territory. This is just, it's okay, it exists. It's inoffensive, and hey, it's one of the few levels where you actually get to use the Mad Cat in a fight that isn't terrible. So, points for that, I guess. Also, I just want to point out Northwind is tied with Terra for having the most boss fights in the game at 3, and we're not even halfway through the list and we've already seen all of them. Yeah, this planet kinda sucks. Number 6, the Raptors. Capping off the game's first planet, we do battle with the Raptors, a mech built up throughout the early game as this threat hunting you, as well as that early 2000s YouTube AMV ass opening movie that the game has. However, the hunting you thing is purely cutscenes. It doesn't actually chase you down in gameplay. Still, it does stand out as the first big mech fight of the game, acting as the first true boss of the game as well. On top of being the first medium mech in the entire series to use nullsig that will keep itself cloaked, and the invisible effect looks really freaking cool in MechAssault 2. Overall, it's just another mech fight, but it acts as a fun first major battle of the game that will put your skills to the test at least a little bit, and the music is kinda cool, I guess, but again, can't play it because MechAssault 2 soundtrack. Also, there's a jet that's flying by throughout the fight, dropping off turrets to add more hazards, but you can shoot it down, and for some reason the jet doesn't have an explosion animation, so when it hits the ground, it just bounces off. It's funny as hell. This is unintentionally probably the funniest or second funniest moment in the entire game. Number 5, Prometheus. You have 2 boss fights against Prometheus, once on Thestria and once on Hesperus 2. The battle on Thestria pits you against 2 Prometheus and a lot of enemy helicopters after a gauntlet of enemies like Oolers and Timberwolves. You thankfully got help here, as the Cretans that managed to survive will lend you their assistance, but they can die in the process of this battle, so it is a challenge to try and keep them alive, or at least keep one of them alive. Natalia, however, will always come in and help with her VTOL, dropping supplies and firing off some crossbow missiles. It's kinda cool and fun standing out as your first battle against an assault mech, and it's much earlier in the game than MechAssault 1's battles were, so I give it some points for that. Later in the game, on Hesperus 2, when you're trying to rescue Natalia, you have to fight off the Prometheus again, now with upgraded weapons, while you're piloting the Blood Asp, and instead of a second Prometheus backing him up, he has a full squadron of catapults to help him. This acts as one of the game's tougher mech fights, but the Blood Asp is extremely powerful, so you have the ability to match their overwhelming numbers with overwhelming firepower, all while being backed up by my favorite of the planet's battle themes, which again, I can't play because MechAssault 2's soundtrack is heavily copywritten. Still, it is a fun fight, and it's kinda cool getting to battle a foe that's tough in the early game, and then still pretty tough in the late game. Number 4, Ragnarok. In the first game, the Ragnarok was a special mech only piloted by the game's main antagonist, Adept Strader. It would act as the game's final boss, or maybe the penultimate boss depending on if you counted the drill as its own fight or not. Here, they're an army you have to overcome, or maybe not. See, in the game's second to last level, you face off with a bunch of Mad Cats, and at the end, the final guard is against the Ragnarok, packing all the weapons from the first game, meaning javelin missiles, Gauss rifles, and the much more accurate than before lava gun. I ended up cutting this fight down to the wire, only winning because I got the Ragnarok to collapse a building on himself. Never say the game doesn't give you some outs sometimes. And to congratulate your hard-fought victory, you need to go to the door that was locked after the fight is over, and the game says, okay, now do it again, as a second Ragnarok is waiting for you with upgraded weapons acting as the game's final mech fight, while tanks and turrets also back him up. Honestly, having a second Ragnarok right behind the door after you think the level is over is unintentionally the funniest moment in this game. But he has lost some style points with his absolute shield being replaced by a long-lasting damage reduction surrounding his body. Here's the thing. Cool, but small problem. That's practical and boring. I don't want useful, I want an indestructible bubble that's only up for a fraction of a second that makes funny noises. Either way, Ragnarok is still fun to fight, even if he is a little bit easier than he was in the first game, if only due to the fact that you have more options at your disposal. Number 3, the Data Core Spider. Why yes, we did skip right past Great Tier and jump straight up to Amazing. There's definitely some intrinsic nostalgia involved in this ranking, but considering that this game is over 2 decades old, I think these top 3 have aged fantastically as boss fights. Anyways, this boss fight is like the tiny spiders, but not tiny, or annoying. The Data Core Spider acts as one of the game's big walls because, sure, you've taken on assault mechs, but that was with health. This goes beyond an assault mech. To defeat this boss, you can't just shoot wildly, instead you need to target and destroy its legs to cripple it, as the legs also provide shielding to the main body, for some reason. It's a video game, just go with it. Of course, the spider isn't going to make it easy on you, as he'll fire off crossbow missiles, stomp the ground, which can knock you over if you're too close, shoot a homing plasma ball, and his strongest attack, a massive beam of plasma that scorches the land around it. It's a tough fight that feels like a hurdle to overcome, but its challenge is offset by the fact that it's just plain fun, and it would be criminal if I didn't mention the boss theme. I can't play it because it's copywritten to hell and back, but having Papa Roaches getting away with murder blasting in the background really sells the intensity of this fight, and also kind of fits the early 2000s butt rock era. On top of that, this boss stands out to me because before Dark Souls, Final Fantasy XIII, Xenoblade Chronicles 1, or even Cynthia from Pokemon Diamond, this was one of the first video game bosses I remember truly getting walled against and having to learn from and get good. Nowadays, I can do it fairly easily, and with the right setup, I can actually kill this boss in under a minute, but as cheesy as it is, this was the boss that made me evolve as a gamer, so to speak, and overcome challenges, and without it, I don't know if I would have enjoyed all the games that are fairly hard that I play these days. So, it's got a special place in my heart. Number 2, the Nova Cat. This boss is built up a decent bit throughout the game, as the mechs that wiped out the Northwind Dragoons, and the thing that captured Major Natalia. This is a boss fight that is weighed heavily against the player, as you're fighting a heavy mech with maxed out weaponry, and your power armor. A straight up battle is not in the cards, but there's a couple ways to handle this boss, making this fight honestly almost like an immersive sim. The intended way is to neurohack him and then force the pilot out of the mech to claim it for yourself, but it's not a freebie, as the Nova Cat will always shield when you get close to him, and a shield automatically forces off a power armor, so you'll have to evade him until the shield wears off, and then go in for the hack and get it done before the shield regenerates. Other options are to trap him in a room with explosives, blowing him up, engage in a game of cat and mouse, luring him into your own makeshift traps and choke points, getting creative with your mortars, trying to collapse buildings on top of him, or just sneaking on by him without ever engaging in combat, since you can see him on your radar, but be warned, while his vision isn't bullshit, he's not blind either, and while he's the only mech on the map, there's plenty of tanks that will give you hell and alert him to your general position. It feels like an evolution of the Puma fight from MechAssault 1, where you need to get creative, but instead of having one clear solution, and one that feels accidental with the bridge collapsing thing, there's plenty of intended ways to take on this threat, and the music does a great job selling the intense atmosphere. No, I'm not throwing up the meme this time. Number 1, Nemesis. The final boss of the game at number 1 again, Christian? Well, I'm nothing if not consistent. Now, some people think this boss is stupid and has no place in the Battletech universe, because an ultimate mech designed to look scary and be piloted by a zealous cult leader is totally out of nowhere in the universe with Native American space Nazis. Okay, nerd. Rant aside, this is a 2-phase boss fight, with phase 1 only having melee, plasma bolts, and mortars. Overall, it's a warm-up phase designed to tell you headshots are the way to go, as that's his only weak spot. But after his head cracks open, his reactor is shielded. He has all the moves from phase 1 when you get to phase 2, but he now has some additional attacks such as laser eyes that are by far his deadliest attack, and you need to keep moving to dodge it, and a flamethrower, which is lethal up close, but thankfully is so short range it can be used to capitalize on his weakness. But be careful, because he can combo his claw slam with his flamethrower to do a lot of damage if you get caught by the slam stun. But to bring the shield down, you have to hack him. Lucky me, I actually like the hacking minigame, at least when it's done with my consent, and including it into the final boss fight gives it that extra wrinkle the fight needed, as well as his head always turning to be in prime mortar position whenever you finish hacking him. That being said, this is by far the toughest fight in the game due to his damage and array of attacks, but thankfully Natalia is constantly dropping off health and power-ups to keep you going. Speaking of Natalia, if she has a 20 rating on me winning this fight, who the hell is betting against me here? Foster? Alara? Probably Alara. Anyways, the other cool thing about this fight is the music being the song Right Now by Korn, and Nemesis being voiced by a guy called David Scully. You might know him from this little indie RPG trilogy called Halo, where he played the role of a minor character known as Sergeant Johnson. Yeah, his voice is awesome, and he's giving his A-game here as well. He's also Dimitri from Sly Cooper, if you've played those games. The fight stands out to me as being one of the first big final bosses I toppled, alongside Cynthia from Pokemon Diamond. And in an interesting inverse from MechAssault 1, where I had to have my dad beat the game, here I ended up taking over for my dad to beat the final boss, and I felt very accomplished doing so. When he finally goes down, he unleashes his Ragnarok army upon you, an unsurvivable encounter in a real fight, so thankfully it's only a cutscene, and we end the game the same way we ended MechAssault 1, with a massive explosion. And that's all for this video. MechAssault 2 is another game I enjoyed the heck out of as a kid. I know a lot of people preferred the first game, and the first game definitely has the better multiplayer, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't prefer this game's story mode. The levels feel more interesting, and while Northwind can suck my nuts, I actually like the other 4/5 of the game quite a bit. It tried a lot of weird things, and I think it paid off well enough, and overall, it's a really fun game that I wish we'd see a remaster of, because good lord, while it's come a long way in Zemu, it still has some serious emulating issues where Tank Rush is now a contender for my second least favorite level in the game. But that's not important, that's just an emulation error. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you like MechAssault, I have a video covering the first game in its entirety, as well as its bosses. Well, air quotes on bosses. Also, consider liking and subscribing to see more content of varying quality from me in the future. I might do a full video on this game one day, but only if a remaster gets announced or if Xbox emulation gets better. Either way, that's all I've got for now. I got a truckload of games from the Steam Spring Sale, so probably more random boss rankings and videos to come soon, as well as a video covering the original Spectrobes. I was very surprised to see that game ended up beating Halo Combat Evolved by a single vote, but hey, I love that game. I love both those games, so I'm happy to play either of them. Anyways, that's all I've got for now. Until next time, I will see you all later. Take care, everyone.